Despite all the big issues here in the United States and overseas, many Republicans have spent the last several months going after Joe Biden. Here's a quick reminder of what House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer said about a potential informant against the Biden family back in May.
You have spoken with whistleblowers. You also spoke with an informant who gave you all of this information. Where is that informant today? Where are these whistleblowers?
Well, unfortunately, we can't track down the informant. We're hopeful that the informant is still there. The whistleblower knows the informant. The whistleblower is very credible.
Hold on a second, Congressman. Did you just say that the whistleblower or the informant is now missing?
Well, we're hopeful that we can find the informant. Now, remember, these informants are kind of in the spy business, so they don't make a habit of being seen a lot or being high profile or anything like that.
Well, it looks like Comer was onto something, but not about Joe Biden, because the mysterious missing witness Republicans have been talking about for months has now been indicted by federal prosecutors on charges of being a foreign agent. I want to get into that and a whole lot more with one of my favorite guests, Democratic strategist James Carville, who, of course, helped elect former President Bill Clinton in the 1990s. And my dear, dear friend Tim Miller joins us, a contributor to The Bulwark and former communications director for Jeb Bush. Mr. Carville, I turn to you first. What is your reaction to all of this James Comer hoopla and the missing informant who's now been charged by our government?
Well, first of all, Comer's a nitwit. All right. The guy was indicted on November the 1st. And he might just be stupid enough to call him. And if he does, the Democrats in that committee are going to have a field day. Something tells me that when they get in his background, this is not what you would call a quality human being. So he might be just stupid enough to walk right into this trap. Honestly, I hope he is.
Tim, here's something sad. Will it actually matter to Republicans that this so-called informant that we've been hearing about for months and months has now been charged with being a Chinese foreign agent? How are Republicans going to feel about this?
Yeah, they're not going to care about that, Steph. It's actually even worse than you describe. Just reading from the indictment really quick, if you don't mind. Luft agreed to covertly recruit and pay on behalf of principals based in China a former high-ranking U.S. government official, including while that official was advising then-President-elect Trump. So just to put this into English, the person that they were going to use as an informant who was going to claim that Joe Biden had illicit dealings with China actually was making illicit dealings with an incoming Trump official. It was the Trump official who was being manipulated by this Chinese agent. All right. And so if these guys actually cared about this, if what they actually cared about on a genuine level was that there was foreign governments improperly interfering, with government officials in the Biden administration, then they would at least pretend to care about the fact that the DOJ put forth evidence today that actually there were foreign agents of China that were improperly influencing somebody that worked for Donald Trump. But they don't care about that because this is all for show. And I guess the only good news here is that it's completely blowing up in their face, unlike some of their other oversight gambits.
All right, Mr. Carville, I want to talk about another key elected official from down south. After a full day of major criticism and doubling down on the comments he made about white nationalism, I want to share with you what Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville said this afternoon.
Listen, I'm totally against any racism, and I'm told that white nationalism, they consider racism. I'm totally against that.
Why was that so hard?
Well, I'll say one thing about Tommy Tuberville. There's truth in packaging. He is as stupid as he looks. And I think every time that he comes on television, every Southern guy like myself and every SEC fans, you just wince. I actually feel sorry for people in Alabama that he's so public and so stupid and such a fool. But what can you? There's nothing you can do about it. I think he's an embarrassment to the Southland.
But it's more than that, because he's actually doing things that have an impact. Tuberville is trying to hold up military promotions over abortion rights. And we have heard from generals warning us that this could cause the armed forces to lose talent, right? So it's not just like this guy's not up for the job, he's a dope. Look at some of the things he's doing.
Right, but I think, honestly, I don't think he realizes what he's doing. I think this guy is so dumb that he's being manipulated. I'm trying to get a guy the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's horrible. You're holding up the whole command structure of the United States Armed Forces. And in just some of the things that he says, I mean, I didn't even know the three branches of government. I mean, it just, at some level, he's just embarrassingly dumb. And I guess people in Alabama just have to deal with it. But, you know, the whole United States military has got to deal with this guy, too. It's bad. I don't agree he makes a fool of himself, but they got to be able to figure some way around this pretty soon, because it's a dangerous world out there.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, I think that you can tell it's not football season. That James didn't make an Auburn swipe there. I kept waiting for one. But look, I mean, I think that in seriousness, this is, this actually, has military implications, right? And like the fact that, and several people have spoken out, retired generals, people like my friend Alex Vindman, about what the impact this is having on the military. And this is just another example of the party that I used to be a part of, not living up to what was some of the most fundamental principles of what they espouse. I mean, how can you be a pro-military, pro-national defense party and have this idiot holding up key figures in the chain of command at a time when we obviously have active military engagement, maybe not troops on the ground, but active military engagement, supporting our allies in Ukraine.
Well, let's turn to the other political part. Yes, James?
No, I just said I don't think the Marine Corps is without a commandant right now, which is
right.
Commandant, like I don't know what, he's such a legendary figure in the culture of the Marine Corps, but this guy, maybe he's just too stupid to know what he's doing. I don't know.
All right, let's turn to the president, James. How do you think Joe Biden's doing?
Well, I mean, he's had one successful thing after another, but he's having a tough sell with the voters, and he's gone out and he's tried to make his case. He went to Chicago. He talked about that. He's had a number of foreign policy successes. I mean, this thing has not gone well for Putin at all. Now we've got, they maneuvered Sweden into NATO, and Finland, which is a big deal. But when the president comes back, he's going to have to work hard on selling what he's done to the American people, because we're deficient in Poland right now, to say the least.
And why do you think that is?
Give me 5 reasons. I don't know. I think people just have, been kind of stubborn for it to be so. But he certainly had the record. I mean, he did a good job of putting everything together. And every time you look around, there's one success after another. But right now, for whatever reason, people don't seem to be giving him credit that I think and most people think he's due.
Tim, I want to share something Chris Christie said earlier today. Watch this.
At this point in 2015, Donald Trump was at 4%. Nobody, and most particularly Jeb Bush, who was at 24%, and Scott Walker, who was at 20%, thought Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee for president. So there's a lot of campaign to go here.
Okay. DeSantis is struggling. Donald Trump is facing indictments, and other GOP nominees are making little to no headway and pretty much no traction with Republican primary voters. What is your take on this whole primary picture at this point?
Yeah. I don't like that Christie had to take a swipe at Jeb there, but I guess I'll move on from that. I think Christie is practicing a lot of some wishful thinking. This is very different than 2016. Donald Trump is a well-known quantity. He was the president. These folks have supported him for 8 years. It's a very different situation than Jeb Bush and Scott Walker were in. He's in a 30-point lead nationally. Ron DeSantis doesn't look capable of taking him on, and the Republican Party voters aren't interested in going back to folks from the pre-Trump era. So Chris Christie's message might appeal to me, but I'm not even a Republican anymore. I'm sure it's like not a median Republican primary voter. So I think that really, right now, if outside of Trump and DeSantis, the person who does the best with the MAGA voters is this guy Vivek Ramaswamy, who has no record, no background to speak of, but he's right now third in the national polls. So I think that is reality. I think Chris Christie is kind of wishing that was not reality, but I think the only way to actually be successful in a campaign is to recognize, what is really happening on the ground and what these voters want. The voters want MAGA Republicans, and so unless a MAGA Republican can give them an alternative, we're going to end up with Donald Trump.
James, same question to you. What is your take on the GOP primary so far?
It's Trump. There's no Republican Party. The Republican Party that Tim Miller used to support and be part of doesn't exist anymore. It's all Trump. It's a personality cult. And as soon as people come to grips with that, I don't know if there's not much that you can do about it, but he's running roughshod. And DeSantis, they have to remind that guy to be human. How do you have a candidate? So don't forget to talk about education. Don't forget to talk about foreign policy. And by the way, be human. It's almost comical, and if Trump goes down, he's going to be replaced with another Trump MAGA person. I think the future heir to MAGA is J.D. Vance, but that's just my guess. But it's not going to be, I like Governor Christie's a friend of mine, and some of these guys I know, but I got news for you. They're not looking for an alternative to Trump. And if they're forced to make one, they're going to get the person that most resembles and the most sycophant to Trump. Look what they did to Lindsey Graham. It's hilarious. Those are South Carolina Republicans. It does not exist. It's gone. It's a personality cult.